Welcome to Connected. I'm your host, Haley Trimboli, and whether you're PhD curious or you're navigating your program right now, or you're wondering what your fellow graduates are up to, this podcast is your go-to for inspiring stories, actionable insights, and meaningful connections within the PhD community. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Emily Pfender to the podcast. Emily is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Pennsylvania, where she's working on a project focused on reducing maternal mortality. Her research dives deep into the ways social media influences women's reproductive health, exploring everything from contraceptive decision-making to menstrual poverty to the role of digital communication in reproductive health outcomes. With experience at the NIH, FDA, and University of Delaware, she brings a fascinating mix of health communication, behavioral science, and digital media research to the table. So I can't wait to dive into her journey from pursuing a PhD in health communication at the University of Delaware to where she is today and how she's using her research to drive real impact. So welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was thorough.
I hope I captured it all.
You did.
Awesome. So, Emily, where does this podcast find you today?
I am in Maryland.
Awesome. All right. So let's just jump right into it. What first sparked your interest in studying health communication and specifically women's reproductive health?
So the communication piece came as an undergraduate student. I was originally interested in being a journalist. And so I was in communication with the S. So in comm, we have communications and communication. And that sounds like a very minor difference, but in our field, it's a very big difference. And so I was originally in the one with the S in journalism, and I took a communication course, and I just absolutely fell in love with studying messages and how they impact human behavior. And so I started to get into that as an undergraduate. I quickly transitioned from journalism to communication, more of a social science. And I started to kind of understand the different components of communication, health being one of them. And so I started working with professors on research projects that allowed me to explore different facets of health. I started out in the mental health space, actually, and I started doing projects with them. Some offered me the opportunity to write a book chapter as an undergraduate. And at that point, I was probably 2 years into the bachelor's degree, and I knew that I wanted to pursue this much further.
Fantastic. Wow. So interesting, first off, about the difference between the communications. I'm not sure I actually understood that. It seems like you had some really great faculty in just your undergrad to bring you into a book chapter. Was that the case?
Yes, I started with some very special faculty, people that were deeply invested in student success. I was actually at a satellite campus at Penn State. And so they actually didn't do, they were more of a teaching focused institution. Research was definitely secondary, but they did pull me in to work on some research opportunities. And so there was a huge focus on supporting students. And for me, that meant offering different research opportunities.
Very cool. And you've worked in both research and policy focused roles. So, how did those experiences shape your decision to ultimately pursue a PhD?
For the policy related roles, do you mean like NIH, FDA, those kinds of positions?
Hmm.
Those came while I was in the PhD.
Okay.
So I think they definitely taught me what it was like as a health communication scholar to work in the federal government and how I could kind of apply my expertise. So with the FDA, I was brought in to teach public speaking to FDA scientists to learn how they could better communicate their findings with diverse audiences. And so I was in more of a learning, training, communication development, professional development role in that case.
Okay.
And then the NIH position was definitely more research focused. That one was in caregiving and rare disease.
Hmm.
And so they definitely showed me the variety of roles that I could play as a person in the communication space because it is a very practical skill. There's a lot of research opportunity, but when it boils down to it, almost everything in life is about communication. I can't think of any organization, government, industry, nonprofit group that doesn't have people focusing on communication. And so I definitely got some experience with those different facets of calm, but ultimately I keep coming back to the research.
Yeah. So what led you to the PhD? So those were during your PhD. So what ultimately led you to pursue a PhD in general?
After I did my master's, I knew that I wanted to learn more about research. My master's degree was primarily, I was in a program of rhetoric, which is the study of symbols and meaning in society through
Hmm.
language. And we did rhetorical work and we did some qualitative work. But I knew that I wanted to be, ultimately, I wanted to be a social scientist and know how to tell a story with numbers as well. And
Hmm.
so I sought out a quantitative social science program where I
Hmm.
could explore questions like, how do messages on social media actually impact the way people behave? Because that's a quantitative question. You need
Hmm.
to do an
Hmm.
experiment to answer a question like that. And so
Hmm.
I didn't have the skill set to answer the questions I had. And so I sought out that quantitative program.
I see. Okay. So is that what drew you specifically to the University of Delaware? Was the program itself, the faculty? Like, was it the faculty? Was it just the quantitative focus, or was there something else that led you to that particular university?
There was a lot that shaped that decision. Definitely, they were a quantitative program. I was the second cohort to start a PhD. I think, maybe the fifth person to graduate with a PhD in communication from the University of Delaware. So it's
Wow.
a very, very new program.
Hmm.
And so that was actually attractive to me because I knew they would be invested in student success and mentorship
Hmm.
if you're early in the stages of a program like that. The other
Hmm.
thing is that my husband works and lives here, right? So I
Okay.
had to make the personal life work as well. And then the University of Delaware, their comm department has a massive focus on health
Hmm.
and media, specifically social media. And
Hmm.
so there was a research team there that I could join that really offered me opportunities to pursue the questions I wanted to alongside other people who were interested in similar ideas. And
Hmm.
then I was also seeking out a mentor there. He ended up being my advisor the
Mm.
whole 4 years. And so he also works in the space of communication and technology. So
Okay.
lots of reasons that brought me to that program.
Yeah, like you knew the mentor or you had known like their work before you also had gone to that particular program?
Yes.
Okay, I see. Great. So, okay, so you had qualitative background before getting into this. So, before you were even starting, like, what were your expectations about maybe like research or this PhD life? Like, did you feel prepared? Was there like uncertainty as you were moving maybe into like a different research discipline?
I felt very prepared and I didn't feel too uncertain about what I was doing because I needed skills to answer the questions I had. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was doing. And I was kind of adding to that toolbox. And the faculty, just like my undergraduate experience, the faculty at the University of Delaware during my PhD were just there for me every step of the way and couldn't have been more supportive in getting me to where I needed to be. And so it was just an absolute pleasure to be in that program and work with those people. And so
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel a lot of uncertainty in my PhD except for when I had to go on the job market.
Okay. So we'll get there, hopefully. So, I mean, what I think a lot of people might feel unprepared, unlike maybe your situation. Sure other folks do feel very prepared, but like, what would you say helped you feel prepared? Like, was it that you just had specific questions before going into the program that made you feel like that was going to help guide you? Was it something else that just your education beforehand that really led to feeling so prepared?
I really think it was that I was just so grateful and excited to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I originally was not offered funding. And the other place that I applied to Rutgers. I got in, but I wasn't offered funding. And so I really thought that this dream of mine to get a PhD, because it really was a dream come true,
Mm-hmm.
I thought it wasn't going to happen. And then at the last minute, someone backed out and they offered me a spot at Delaware. And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't even think of not being prepared or feeling nervous about it because I was just so grateful to be a part of that process. And I just couldn't
Mm-hmm.
believe that it worked out. So I think that's what ultimately did it for me.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that seems like a huge, huge thing. Can you talk a little bit about like funding, not funding, like for students who might be considering one of those routes, and thinking about that in their decision? Like, it sounds like that was pretty fundamental for you and probably led to like the really great experience. Like, what would you tell students who are navigating that decision of like, do I pursue if I'm not getting funding? Do I only pursue if I get funding? Like, what's your kind of point of view on that?
My point of view is a little rigid. I would never pay for a PhD, but I'm also not in a discipline where that's common. It's very uncommon in the communication space to pay for a PhD. Most people, I think, in the communication space would say, just wait one more year and apply again. Do not start a PhD unless you are fully funded. And fully funded for me in the communication space meant getting either a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship where I was teaching 2 classes a semester or
Mm-hmm.
working on a grant as a research assistant. And that would be about 20 hours of work a week, which would then cover my tuition and a living stipend 9 months out of the year. And so it just wasn't, I don't come from money. I come from a blue collar background. I don't come from highly educated people. I was the first woman in my family to get a bachelor's degree. I was the first person to get a master's degree, and certainly the first person to get a PhD. And so this just would not have been possible for someone like me unless there was funding. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I feel pretty strongly about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. So, what did your family think since you've sort of navigated this territory? Like, they knew you were going into the PhD. Like, what was your family or friends' reactions in that?
My parents are just super proud and very excited about it. And my dad and I don't have a particularly close relationship. But every now and then, my mom will call me and be like, "Dad was bragging about you again to someone that his daughter is a doctor." And he would never say that to me, right? I hear this through the
Mhm,
grapevine because
mhm,
that's how he is, and that's fine. But
mhm,
I know that they're very proud and they're very excited about it. And they don't necessarily know what communication means. I think they know that I'm a women's health scientist and that's how I identify, and they know what women's health is, and that's enough. But
mhm.
we don't have deep conversations about it, but I know that they're very proud of it.
Yeah, yeah. I think I have a similar background, and so I think like when it comes to like getting into conversations around like research or things that I'm doing, it's like, yeah, it's always funny to like try to hone in on like what I'm like, what am I trying to share here? Like, what would make the most sense to family or friends who are like aren't in the world, right? Because it can be very abstract, I think sometimes. So.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then you get in. Actually, one more question, sort of pre-PhD. Like, can you shine a little light on like your application process? Like, any tips that you would share? Like, not having to totally go into all the details, but would you just shine a little light into like what that experience was like for you of actually like applying to get into this program?
Yeah, so I had to write a statement, a personal statement, and provide a CV. And I had to do a video essay, which was horrifying. There was basically a question that popped up on the screen, and you had to answer it on video in 3
Mm,
minutes, and it was
mm,
saved and submitted with your application. I have talked to
mm-hmm.
them about getting rid of that option. I hated that. But the personal statement, I worked closely with an undergraduate professor who I connected with very well. He guided me through my personal statement for my master's degree application as well as my PhD. And so I had someone reviewing and going over draft after draft after draft. And he wasn't even in the communication space. He was an English professor.
Mm,
We developed a close relationship and he helped me work through that. I relied a lot on undergraduate and master's professors that I had to kind of ask
mhm,
questions about how can I make myself stand out? What types of
mhm,
things should I include in my, my letter? For example, one of the things that I was told to include in my statement was, what faculty do I want to work with and why do I want to work with them? And what kinds of, what topic areas am I interested in? What have I done thus far in the field of communication? How do I see myself contributing to the field? And, why do I want to be a scientist? And so
mhm,
those are the things that I reflected on, as well as personal lived experiences that drew me to study health.
mm.
And so I talked about some of those things in the letter. And then, yeah, the CV was just learning how to position and highlight everything I've done in a meaningful way.
Yeah. I think that's helpful of like not feeling like somebody in your field per se has to like completely review everything that you're submitting, but just using the resources that you have. And maybe that's a great relationship with a formal faculty member or somebody in your network who you know could support and look through some of your documents before sitting or hitting submit to send them in.
Yeah, there was definitely I had a lot of support in putting that application together. It's not something that I did on my own. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. I think that's valuable for folks to understand. So great. Okay. So then you get into the program. So I hope I'm capturing this right, but your research focused on social media's impact on reproductive health. So curious to what drew you to that topic and then how did it evolve during your PhD?
So I went into the PhD thinking I was going to study like technology and mental health and quickly realized that I wasn't interested in that and passionate about that like I thought I was.
Hmm.
And I was just scrolling on Instagram one day and I started to realize just observationally that all of these influencers were talking about discontinuing hormonal contraception. And it was just a thought. I was like, huh, I wonder like if people are actually listening to this and altering their contraceptive choices
Mm-hmm.
because they were advocating for discontinuation of really effective methods and uptake of very ineffective methods that could range anywhere from 3 to 33% error rate. And so if 33% of the time you get pregnant from this form of contraception, I would say that that's pretty problematic. And so I just noticed it and I did a study on it, put something together, did a study, published it, 6 months, was really into it, was so excited about it. And it all just kind of started there. And I realized that what I was genuinely interested in was the way reproductive health is talked about on social media, how it gets wrapped up in health trends, how that's connected to misinformation, and then how that impacts behavior. My dissertation was a follow up of the first study. It was exposing people to these messages and seeing if it would alter their intention to use less effective birth control options. And we
Mm-hmm.
didn't find any direct effects because that type of work is hard to do with a one shot exposure. Typically, people change behavior over repeated exposure to media, not just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, we did find that those who viewed the influencer as more trustworthy and as having greater expertise were more likely to intend to use the less effective contraceptive.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. And that was going to be like one of my follow-up questions is like, so it sounds like that was a key finding, like any other like breakthrough moments or other key findings that you found from the research that like shifted your perspective or maybe things that you're even still working on.
Some of the other things that came up just in examining the messages about contraception on social media were lots of myths and lies about contraceptives. In one study of 100 TikTok videos, we found a total of 57 cited side effects. And they
Mhm.
ranged from anything from birth control causes cancer to birth control changes who you're attracted to and is the reason for the divorce rate in the United States. Really wild claims
Mhm.
that are not true. And
Mhm.
so those were some of the things that we were finding that we're still looking into and writing grants to explore further. But that's just one of the topic areas that I've been interested in the context of social media. I've looked at other things like the trend of cycle syncing, which is aligning your menstrual cycle phases with the way you eat and the way you exercise. And we've
Mm.
found
Mhm.
really concerning messages about that because it would suggest that when a woman is on her period during her menstrual phase, she should only rest and not work out, which we
Mhm.
know that consistent exercise is associated with better health outcomes. And so it's just so easy to get swept up in these health trends about reproductive health that could have harmful consequences for women consuming this content.
Yeah, yeah, super interesting. And I definitely want to explore a little bit more on like what you're looking at there. Um I am curious though, because as you were working as it sounded like a research assistant, teaching assistant, I think in the program, also you did the NIH FDA work. Like, Seems like a lot. How are you balancing it all? Like, what sort of insight can you share on for students who might be in a program taking on different responsibilities to how you help to balance it?
So I was a teaching assistant during the semester and I was working on research as well. There were just certain things that I put less time into. Like, I know that there were tons of other students, let's say you're assigned 4 articles for a class that meets once a week, right? So 20, 40, 60, 80 pages of reading. While they were reading it word for word, I wasn't because I was pouring more of my time into getting research done and doing things that I felt like were going to benefit me in the long run in terms of getting a job.
Mm,
And so I was very specific about how much time I was pouring into certain tasks, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to say that reading is not beneficial. Of course it is. And we need to be
mhm,
doing that as scientists. We need to understand the literature and theories and concepts. But I certainly wasn't reading every single word and spending hours upon hours upon hours reading for class. And
mhm,
so there were just certain ways that I saved myself some time.
mhm.
Also, my fellowships with the government were in the summer
Okay.
and they were remote.
Mhm,
And so that was, very helpful in terms of time. I wasn't driving back and forth somewhere. The one summer I had to go in once a week, and it was a 2 to 2.5 hour drive one way. So I was like getting up at 4 a.m. and leaving the house by like 4:45 so that I could get there very early and then leave by 2 p.m. before traffic hit. And I was in the car for like 3 or 4 hours.
mm.
But that was once a week, right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, there were times that I was working a lot, but I also made sure that I wasn't like working every weekend.
Mhm,
So I wasn't working Saturdays and I would allocate 4 hours on Sundays to work.
mhm, mhm,
Everyone's balance of what they find is appropriate is different. I was not working evenings. At 5 o'clock every evening, I was hanging out with my husband making dinner.
mm,
So I had very strict rules for that. And it also helps that my husband is a professor and administrator in academia. And so we kind of have like a checks and balance for each other about
mm,
when it's appropriate to be working and then when it's time to come together and talk about our day and spend quality time together. And so having someone else kind of on the same schedule with the same boundaries was really useful and
mhm,
helpful.
mhm,
And so I think that the balance just really came into play with having a partner who was kind of had the same goals and doing the same thing, but then also, knowing that there are parts of the semester where you're just going to have to grind. And it just
mhm,
is what it is. But we get massive breaks in academia that people do not get in industry.
mhm,
Right? If you
mhm,
want to take a whole month off in the summer, I wouldn't recommend that, but you can. If you truly need to recharge that long, you have that option. And so sometimes I think that we forget how lucky we are.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, so it sounds like, I mean, that's nice that you and your husband are like both sort of in the same field and can help each other out in that space. Like, did it take a lot of like upfront organization to like create those boundaries? Like, did it sort of take time for you in the process, or were you pretty clear upfront of like, this is the lifestyle I have and I want, and you maintained that?
We were clear from the beginning about what that
Mhm,
was gonna look like for us. That doesn't mean that every once in a while, last weekend, he was like, "Hey, I need to be in the office Saturday and Sunday this weekend, and I need to be in there for like 8 hours each day." And I was like, "Okay, that's fine." And so some it's not perfect. It's not a perfect system, but for the most part, we really do stick to it. And so I think that's a huge part. I also think that working efficiently is important. So I would never sit down for 4 hours at a time and work. I
mhm,
don't operate that way. I lock
mhm,
in for 1 or 2 hours at a time, and
mm,
then I go for a walk and take a mental and physical break, and then I come back and I lock in for another 1 to 2, and then I take another, like, break, and so I think figuring out what your mind and body needs and how to work efficiently is a useful exercise.
mhm. Yeah, I love that. I think that's huge, and not like taking yourself beyond a point to where it's not even efficient, it's not effective anymore, and being able to stay mindful enough to recognize like, is it a better use of my time if I just head outside for a bit and then come back? So I think that's
Absolutely.
wise.
There are
Mhm.
many days that I just stop working at 3, or some days I stop working at 2 because I've had enough, and forcing myself to keep going isn't going to produce quality work. So,
Mhm.
knowing, what your body needs and knowing those boundaries and listening to your body. I mean, I know that I get all tense and stressed out and my back hurts and things just don't feel good. And so I'm not interested in working through that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that, and I think that's very wise, and hopefully folks will resonate with that. Were there any, like, what were some of the, I feel like there always is, so unexpected challenges maybe, like either in research or just personally that you had to navigate throughout your program?
I have a big one. It was I started the program in 2020. In 2022, I had a massive injury,
Mm.
and, I sought care and guidance from medical professionals for 8 months, living
Mm.
in chronic pain, severe chronic pain, before
Mm.
I was diagnosed with a labral tear and something called impingement, and so essentially I thought that I had caused the injury from my weightlifting and exercise, but I was born with a mal-shaped femur that was slowly cutting a hole in my hip cartilage my whole life.
Wow.
And so it got to a point where during this time I couldn't work out, which was a huge identity loss. Working out is how I did the PhD. It's just how I do life. It's my outlet.
Mhm.
It's a passion of mine. I mean, I teach fitness on the side now, and so I lost that in the process. Living in chronic pain while trying to do a PhD is very hard,
Mm.
and I do believe that it is what got me through because rather than me sitting around like suffering all day, I had something to focus my mind on, which actually reduced the pain that I was in, and so that was
Mhm.
quite positive.
Mhm.
And it gave me purpose and it got me through. So
Mm.
I do think it was positive, but all the appointments, everything was such a challenge. I finally was diagnosed 8 months after the issue started, and then another 4 months later, I had a surgery.
Mm.
In the middle of a semester,
Wow.
a couple weeks after I defended my comprehensive exam, and while I was writing the proposal for my dissertation. And so I got the surgery, and it was still 8 months to a year before I wasn't in pain anymore constantly.
Mm. Wow.
So I struggled with chronic pain for 2 years during my PhD as a result of this. If I wouldn't have had the surgery, it was basically just gonna get to a point where I wouldn't have been able to walk anymore. It would have been so bad.
Mhm.
It was like dealing with the thought of just simple stuff like, "Oh my god, I don't know if I can go to this restaurant because the parking lot's too far and it's gonna be too painful to walk from the car to the restaurant."
Yeah.
And so those thoughts were so heavy. It got to a point where, um, I had to be driven around to my classrooms to teach because I couldn't walk anymore on
Mm.
campus.
Mm.
And so I couldn't stand to lecture anymore.
Mhm.
And so just the simple things that we take for granted, like I go into a classroom today and there isn't a day that I don't stand in the classroom and think, I'm so grateful to stand here without pain.
Mhm.
Yeah. So every time I do a workout, I think about how grateful I am that my surgery was successful.
Mm.
And so that was the single greatest challenge of my life in my 29 years
Mhm.
of life. And it
Wow.
just so happened to happen during my PhD.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure you're absolutely grateful now. Like, why didn't you quit? Like, what kept you in? Like, were you like, this is what I'm doing? Like, I think some people might have been like, I need to maybe step out. I don't know, like, while you're in it.
I had enormous support from my department. This just goes back
Okay.
to it. So I had the surgery in March, which was in the middle of a semester. And so I was teaching 2 classes that semester.
Mhm.
And they had me teach it until my surgery, and then they
Mhm.
paid someone to come in and finish one of my courses for me, and then they allowed me to
Okay.
put the other course online for the rest of the semester,
I see.
and just told me, "Just do what you need to do.
Mm.
We don't care what that is. Obviously, we want the best for the students and want a good course for the students, but
Yeah.
they just trusted me to make it happen,
Mm.
and they just gave me what I needed." And
Mm.
there was a time where someone said, "Do you need to take leave. And I said, if I sit around without anything to do on leave in my home in excruciating pain like this
Yeah.
24/7, I don't think that's good. Like, I couldn't think of
Mm,
anything worse for my mental health. So
mm.
to have the research and the excitement of new research and coursework and interacting with my peers and my professors, that gave me a reason to keep going.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to hear that. Are you like out of pain now and like back like to a good place?
I'm 100%. I can't
Amazing.
run.
Mhm.
That's something I did lose.
Okay.
I can't run. I'm not like devastated because um the reason why I got into spin and teaching spin was because my surgeon told me that spin would be a low impact way to get the same high as running.
Mhm.
And I started it, fell in love with it, and now I teach it. And
Mhm.
so everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, it really does. Wow, that's amazing
Yeah.
that that's what led you to that. Okay, so then you graduated last year, so big congratulations to you. And now that you have completed your PhD, how has the transition to a postdoc at Penn been like? And also, like, can you tell a little bit around like how you landed, I guess? Maybe before I go into that question, like you graduated and then what were you thinking and what happened next for you?
So I graduated in May. I started on the job market way before then. And in October, the October before I graduated, I was just scanning local universities because,
Mhm.
my husband's here, so I want to make it work and
Mhm.
find something in the area. And so I was just scanning local universities and I was like, let me just see what Penn has. Let me see if they have any postdocs. And I scroll down and there's a postdoc in maternal women's health and health
Mhm.
disparities and health equity. And I was like, wow, that would be a good fit. Like, I study women's health. It's not social media, but it's women's health. And so, what a great opportunity. I put something together, I had my husband and my two advisors read my cover letter. I did the edits, sent it in with my CV, and 30 minutes after I sent it in, I got a request for an interview.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, wow, what a great day. And I was not expecting that because I had been sending in tons of job applications and hearing nothing for months.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it was bad.
Mhm.
And so to hear something so quickly, I was like, wow, this is off to a great start. And a couple weeks later, I interviewed on Zoom. The interview was more of a presentation of the grant and the project and just a couple of questions about what I'd like to get out of a postdoc. It
Mm.
was very casual.
Mhm.
And I sent a thank you note right away after the interview. I didn't hear back. It was like 4, 5, 6 weeks after. I didn't hear back. And I was like, damn, I didn't get it.
Mhm.
And then, like, the next day after feeling that way, I got an email, "Congratulations, we'd love to bring you on." And so I had a postdoc in November, and I graduated in May. So I the whole spring semester, I didn't have to think about getting a job. It was
Mhm.
just it was set, honestly, almost a year in advance.
Wow. Did you want to get into a postdoc? Like, was that always the plan for you, or were you sort of broadly looking at the job market?
I was looking at everything. I was looking at
Mhm.
industry, I was looking at tenure track positions, I was looking at postdocs. Everyone told me I needed to do a postdoc, and it just so happens that that's what worked out. I personally don't know if I want to stay in academia. I think I could be happy in a variety of spaces, but that's where I am right now, and it's going very well.
Mhm.
Yeah, so let's tell me about it. Like, how has the transition been to this postdoc?
So I was a little confused at first because this is a very hands-off group.
Okay.
So it's really a scenario in which, hey, we might have a couple things come up. Here are the meetings. Here's how you can support us. Here are some things that you can get involved in. But we're really here to support you in your research program and want you to use this time to further build your CV.
Mhm.
And so I do a ton of independent research, things that I'm just genuinely interested in. I just did a study, an experiment on how what I eat in a day videos impact women and nutrition and behavior.
Mm.
I'm further exploring things like maternal health. So we're looking at things like preeclampsia, which is a hypertensive disorder on TikTok and how that's discussed and what that looks like for different racial groups, racial and ethnic groups on TikTok. And
Mhm.
so I've just had so much space to pursue the questions that genuinely interest me. It couldn't be a better scenario. They support me in going to conferences. They support me with funds for my research. We do run some research in Tanzania. My husband does a lot of work over in Tanzania as well with students. And so I go with him and do research while I'm there on menstrual poverty. And I mean, my postdoc is supporting me in returning in January 2026 for an entire month. So I again, I've landed in a very supportive environment, but they are very hands off, meaning that I may not meet with my supervisor every month. Like we might meet like in other meetings to get stuff done for the grant, but it's
Mhm.
not personally about where I am or what I'm doing. They just trust me to be productive. Writing a ton of grants. I wrote 2 grants last semester. I'm writing 2 now. I'm teaching. I teach 4 classes this semester. I taught 3 in the fall. So they support me in teaching at other institutions. Yeah, it's a gift. I got lucky.
Mhm.
I got very
Mm.
lucky.
That sounds amazing. And so you're kind of doing it all. You're researching, you're teaching, you're writing grants and everything. Like as far as like balance again, like is it sort of the same principles that you shared beforehand or sort of applicable for you here post in the postdoc, like outside of the PhD? Or are there any other like how are you kind of balancing this different load, I guess?
I'll be completely honest. I run myself ragged during the semester. And some people, would think badly about that or think like, oh, well, I don't want that. And that's okay. But I want this. And so I'm willing to do that. And I have to say, this is the first time in my life that I've ever had the opportunity to make any money.
Mm.
And so when someone's offering me 4 classes, I could absolutely say no, right? That's a
Mm.
lot. A lot of people would say, "Oh my gosh, that would be too much." Well, um, I'm trying to start my life, and that means that some, money would help me
Mhm.
do that. I have a lot
Mhm.
of financial goals and I am getting
Mhm.
started later in life, right? I'm 29 and I just finished school. And so I'm trying to build a financial foundation for myself. And so am I working? I'm working all the time. Yes. Every weekend, every day. Yes, I am. But I take a lot of time off during winter break and I take a lot of time off in the summer. So the work ebbs and flows.
Mhm.
While I'm teaching and doing the postdoc at the same time and teaching spin, yeah, it's madness.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with that right now. Do I wanna do this long term? Is it sustainable? I don't think so.
Yeah. But you're aware of that and you'll adjust as needed. And for now, it's matching your goals, I guess, right? Like it's aligning to where you're wanting to go.
Yeah, and I would also say that I'm not unhappy. I
Mhm.
genuinely feel like I'm thriving,
That's great.
and,
Right.
there are other personal parts of my life that kind of factor into this. I don't have children, I don't plan to have children. My husband's an academic, so he understands that if I need to put the time in, that's not going to bother him or be frustrating for him. He's just 100% supportive, and so,
Mhm.
um, I know that other people finish the PhD and they're like, "Wow, I'm 29, I wanna start to build a family," and so maybe they don't, run themselves ragged like I'm doing,
Mhm.
right? It just depends on your goals in life, and
Yeah.
so this is working for me right now, and I feel
Mhm.
happy, and so
Good.
I'm just gonna go with it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's key because then you'll be able to sustain it while you're in it as as long as you're feeling good. So you're like, how do you see your research now making an impact beyond academia? I'm like curious to hear more on like, because I feel like you're in this very interesting space, and so like, how does the research or how do you think you want your research to make the impact outside of academia, or how is it?
I think that's still something I'm trying to figure out. I do know that that's why I started doing social media. January 1st, I decided that a goal of mine was to, and I don't necessarily believe that you have to have a goal January 1st, but there was just this genuinely something that I wanted to do that I've been holding back on. And I thought, let me try this. And that's disseminating my findings on social media and
Mm-hmm.
disseminating things about academia and publishing and science and women's health. And so that's kind of the way that I'm disseminating information right now outside of my work sitting in a journal behind a paywall
Mm-hmm.
that most people don't even care to read. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of how I'm approaching it right now. Often from especially from reporters get questions about, so what kind of policy would you recommend for social media? How do we stop this harmful content? What do we do about this? And
Mm-hmm.
so I would like to work in the policy space at some point on some of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that my perspective on this is often not the one people are hoping for because I don't really believe in censorship. And sometimes I think that there's this tendency to want to censor misinformation. And I think there's a lot of work to be done or to figure out we can't censor it, right? Because that's a violation. How can we work around it? Or how can we teach people how to better identify misinformation and consume it, especially young people? So this
Mm-hmm.
gets into health literacy skills, knowing the difference of, credible versus not credible sources. It really goes back to the basics. And I think that I would like to potentially do some work in that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the near future or like far future?
I think that's a far off because I would like to kind of just sit in my research bubble and just crank out papers right now. That's kind of what makes me happy. Honestly, just
Mm-hmm.
I work from home as well. Like my postdoc's completely remote. And so
Mm-hmm.
I feel very happy just in my office writing papers,
Yeah.
working with data. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'd like to continue doing that for
Mm-hmm.
a while now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. So, like, looking ahead, what's next for you? Like, are there any exciting projects, collaborations, big ideas that you haven't talked about yet that you're really excited about that you can share?
Things are kind of in the works right now. Like in terms of grants, I'm currently writing one to work on something called pre-bunking, and this idea of not necessarily exposing people to misinformation, but providing counter arguments to it before they're exposed to the misinformation. We're doing this in the context of vaccines and contraception because
Mm,
there's a lot of myths about those things on social media. And so we're creating videos. We have a couple of different actors kind of playing a role in these videos, and we're creating them. And then hopefully we will show them to women in OBGYN clinics in the Penn system. We're not sure what that population will look like just yet, and we're kind of working through some of the details, but it would hopefully encourage them to speak to their doctors about things like vaccines and contraception, especially during pregnancy, because there's a lot of controversy around vaccines during pregnancy. And that kind of ties into the maternal health area of my postdoc. So that's some of the grant we're working on. And then I'm just really looking forward to going back to Tanzania. The IRB finally was approved, and I'm working on getting my research permit. It is quite a process to do research in another country.
mm,
And so working through the research permit right now, and I'll be returning hopefully in January of 2026. And we're actually going to be we're working with a nonprofit organization to do women's circles. That's what the nonprofit does. And it's going to be an educational intervention about preeclampsia and the warning signs for it because it's a major predictor of maternal mortality in Tanzania. And there's not a lot of education about it. And
mm-hmm.
so we're hoping that this intervention will increase intentions to seek care if they experience the signs and symptoms of this condition.
Wow. Yeah. And when are you heading out there? So you return in January. How long will you be there for?
We'll be leaving, I think, January 3rd, and we'll be back like the 28th. So almost at least 3 weeks in country. Yeah. Last time
Amazing.
we were there was 2024, January
Mm-hmm.
2024 for the month.
Okay. 2 years later.
Yep. 2 years later.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, I have two questions left that I ask each guest. The first one is, what's one book, podcast, or article that every PhD student should read or listen to?
Okay. I have it right here. Oh, it's not here. It's by Robert Cialdini. Let me look at the title. Let me just Google it real quick because I don't know where the book is.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very communication of me. The Psychology of Persuasion.
Okay.
I love that book. I teach that book in my
Mm,
classes. Persuasion is a really useful tool, even
mm,
for just as simple as negotiating a salary in your first job after PhD. And
mm,
so it gives a lot of really, really useful evidence-based practices for just being
mm-hmm.
a more persuasive communicator, which
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone could benefit from,
Mm-hmm.
especially in academia, because you're going to need a lot of things throughout your career. And if you're a better communicator, you may be more likely, maybe more able to achieve those things.
Yeah. Do you apply this in your grant writing? Anything learned in it?
I try. I try to include a couple of things. I unfortunately didn't get to use the strategies for negotiating for salary because when you're on an NIH grant, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
that makes
so that
sense.
was yeah, so that was a bummer. But yeah, I would recommend that book. Did I miss the other
Cool.
question?
No, that was it. And then we'll actually one more question after this. So I'll link to that. And then if you could give your younger self one piece of advice before starting your PhD, what would it be?
I would probably just say to pursue what genuinely interests you. Like, it doesn't need to be some fancy topic because the more interested and passionate you are about the topic, the more productive, the more successful you'll be. Pursue
Hmm.
something that genuinely interests you. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that work is not a job, it's fun.
Yeah, that seems to be a very red thread through your, at least just through our discussion today. I've noticed that from you. So, and that you have a lot of gratitude for the places that you're in. And so, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your time and the conversation. I think listeners will get a lot out of this. And so, thank you so much. Before we wrap up, where can people connect with you or follow your work or learn more about what you're doing?
People can find me on social media, on Instagram. I have a lot of things linked on my Instagram. I have a lot of my research posted, my Google Scholars on there if you were interested in looking at any of my articles. And so, yeah, you can find me there.
Okay, perfect. I will link to that in the show notes as well so others can connect with you. So thank you so much for your time and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was so great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
All right. Well, have
That was an awesome conversation with Dr. Emily Pfender. I thought she had a lot of valuable insights to share for anyone in the PhD journey, whether you're just starting or finishing. I think she is very focused on her topic, and that has led her to have clarity throughout her time in academia to current day. And I can really sense that through our discussion today. I also think that she has a lot of gratitude for where she is. And so I really appreciated that insight. What resonated with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop me a message or a comment. Thanks for tuning in to Connected today. You can find all of the links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your PhD community. And be sure to follow along on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for more conversations like this. So I hope to see you next time, and let's stay connected.